There is a place just south of Mexico City where the soil has been farmed continuously for more than 1,500 years. No tractors, no synthetic fertilizer, no irrigation systems, no crop rotations designed by agribusiness consultants. And yet the land still produces harvest after harvest after harvest. Broccoli, spinach, corn, radishes, flowers, up to 7 harvests every year from the same plots of land. One farmer working only a few thousand square meters can pull more food from the earth in a week than many industrial farms produce in months. The methods he uses are almost unchanged from those of his ancestors. The system is called the Chinampa. Most people have never heard the word. But before modern Europe understood sanitation, before industrial agriculture existed, before the first fertilizer factory was built, the Chinampa fed one of the largest cities on earth. And for 5 centuries, powerful institutions have tried to erase it. First with conquest, then with drainage projects, then with urban expansion, then with property laws so quiet most people never noticed them happening. They almost succeeded. To understand the Chinampa, you have to imagine the Valley of Mexico as it once was. Not the sprawling concrete basin of today, but a high-altitude world of interconnected lakes surrounded by volcanoes. Shallow water stretched across the valley floor. Marshes blended into wetlands. Seasonal floods moved life and nutrients through the entire ecosystem. Around 1,500 years ago, the people living there began building something extraordinary. They drove wooden stakes into the shallow lake bed and wove reeds between them, forming underwater walls. Into those enclosures they piled mud dredged from the lake bottom, mixed with decomposing vegetation. Layer by layer, the mud rose above the waterline until a long rectangular island emerged. Then they planted willow trees at the corners. The roots anchored the structure permanently into the lake bed. The result was not a floating garden, despite what tourist brochures often claim. A Chinampa is fixed in place, a living agricultural platform surrounded by canals. And by nearly every measure we have, it became one of the most productive farming systems humanity ever created. The genius of the Chinampa was not machinery. It was biology. The surrounding canals constantly fed moisture upward into the soil through capillary action. The roots of crops always had access to water. The farmer did not irrigate. The lake irrigated for him. Meanwhile, the canals produced fertilizer automatically. Every few months, farmers dredged dark sediment from the canal bottoms, nutrient-rich mud packed with decomposed plants, fish waste, and organic matter. That mud was spread back onto the fields. The system continuously regenerated its own fertility. Nothing was wasted. The willow trees stabilized the edges, shaded young crops, and dropped organic material back into the canals, feeding the cycle again. Water fed plants. Plants fed the canals. The canals rebuilt the soil. The soil fed the next harvest. A closed biological loop. No imported chemicals. No fossil fuel dependency. No synthetic nitrogen. Just ecology working exactly as intended. When the Aztec Empire rose to power, they did not invent the Chinampa. They scaled it. They expanded the system around their capital city, Tenochtitlan, which stood on islands in the middle of the lakes. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1519, thousands of hectares of Chinampas surrounded the city. Spanish chroniclers described enormous markets overflowing with food, flowers, herbs, and produce. The city supported hundreds of thousands of people. At a time when many European cities struggled with famine and sewage, Tenochtitlan had engineered one of the most productive urban food systems in human history. And then came the conquest. When Hernán Cortés besieged Tenochtitlan, he understood something crucial. The city depended on water. Spanish forces destroyed dams and water control systems that protected the freshwater farming zones from flooding and salinity. Those systems were never fully rebuilt. After the conquest, the Spanish colonial government faced repeated flooding in the valley. Instead of adapting to the lakes, they chose to eliminate them. Over centuries, engineers drained the Valley of Mexico lake system through canals, tunnels, and massive drainage works. Lake after lake disappeared. The Chinampas disappeared with them. Only fragments survived in the southern wetlands of Xochimilco. And the irony is brutal. The lakes were drained so the city could expand onto the lake bed. But the lake bed was never stable ground. Today, parts of Mexico City sink by astonishing rates each year because the city still rests on soft sediments that once lay underwater. Buildings crack, roads warp, infrastructure collapses. The land remembers what it used to be. Even after centuries of damage, the remaining Chinampas in Xochimilco continued producing food well into the 20th century. So modern development delivered another blow. Urban sprawl consumed wetlands. Freshwater springs were diverted into municipal systems. Groundwater pumping dried the canals. Once the canals weakened, the Chinampa system began to fail. Without living water, a Chinampa becomes ordinary soil. Then came privatization laws in the 1990s that allowed communal agricultural lands to be sold off. Developers moved in. Canals were abandoned. Fields collapsed. Knowledge disappeared generation by generation. Today, only a small percentage of the historic Chinampa network remains actively farmed. The most efficient farming system ever created is vanishing almost unnoticed. There is another victim of this collapse, the axolotl. Axolotl once thrived in the canals surrounding the Chinampas. For centuries it survived in huge numbers because the waterways were clean, oxygen-rich, and biologically alive. Then pollution, invasive fish species, sewage runoff, and urbanization devastated the ecosystem. Axolotl populations collapsed. The animal became a warning signal. When the canals died, the farming system died with them. Here is the uncomfortable truth modern agriculture does not like to discuss. The Chinampa solved problems industrial farming still struggles with today. It maintained fertility without synthetic chemicals. It conserved water without irrigation infrastructure. It produced food locally inside urban regions. It resisted monoculture collapse through biodiversity. It regenerated soil instead of exhausting it. Modern agriculture often treats nature like a machine to overpower. The Chinampa treated nature like a partner. And that difference changed everything. Despite centuries of destruction, the system is not completely gone. Researchers, farmers, and conservation groups in Xochimilco are restoring canals, rebuilding Chinampas, and preserving traditional methods. Some farmers now sell produce labeled as Chinampa grown to distinguish it from industrial agriculture. Around the world, small communities studying regenerative agriculture are revisiting the same principles the Chinampa mastered centuries ago. Closed nutrient cycles, water-integrated farming, polyculture systems, soil regeneration, local food production. The technology itself was never complicated. That is what makes the story so unsettling. The Chinampa did not depend on advanced machines. It depended on understanding ecology. Somewhere along the way, modern civilization stopped designing agricultural systems around living biology and started designing them around industrial inputs. The Chinampa is proof that another path once existed, and maybe still does.